to agenda item 8, pretty much every element in the response to the letter of concern gives cause for further concern. Given time constraints, I'll only address one of these, contact tracing. Proper contact tracing is needed to control the disease, but the numbers offered in the response suggest that control cannot be achieved here. Andy Slavitt, former head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, who is deeply involved in COVID-19 mitigation efforts, estimates that it takes 4 to 5 people over 3 days to do one contact trace, about 15 person days per case. Meanwhile, the response says that PHMDC contact tracers are each doing 2 cases a day. That's a 30-fold difference from what Slavitt is saying is needed to properly contact trace a case. Let's move on to the number of contacts. A major report from the Royal Society Data Evaluation and Learning for Viral Epidemics Initiative estimates that 10 to 12 COVID contacts should be traced per index case. There are other estimates available for the number of close contacts that need to be traced or that actually are traced elsewhere. There are estimates calculated from general data about close contacts and estimates from COVID-19 specific contact tracing data. Some of those estimates are higher than 10 to 12, some are lower, but many are in the same ballpark. Meanwhile, the response from PHMDC states that in Dane County, they're tracing 2.1 contacts per COVID-19 case, and thus more contact tracers aren't needed. I've not been able to find any published data for a locality tracing that low a mean number of contacts. I've not been able to find anything even particularly close to that low a mean. That so few contacts are being traced appears to suggest a potential problem with the contact tracing operation here. Moving on to the number of contact tracers needed, the guidelines I provided, assembled by a group of public health heavyweights, recommends about 30 contact tracers per 100,000 before initiating reopening. Johns Hopkins recommends something very similar. That would require approximately 163 contact tracers for Dane County. Based on the number of COVID-19 cases in Wisconsin, covidactnow.org estimates that Wisconsin needs 4,140 contact tracers, taking Dane County's population as a proportion of that. That would be 385 contact tracers for Dane County. 2 public health heavyweights, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, the National Association of County and City Health Officials, and the Mullen Institute at the George Washington University, put out a sophisticated calculator for each county for the number of contact tracers needed. It takes demographic data into account. Taking the number of confirmed cases from last week, an average of about 11 per day, it estimates we need 83 contact tracers. That's the lowest legitimate number I can come up with. Meanwhile, the PHMDC response refers to a, quote, nationally developed contact tracing calculator, which I find kind of misleading. It's a small Excel spreadsheet posted online by a particular nonprofit that offers virtually no guidance, such that you can work the problem backwards to get almost any result you want for the number of needed contacts. The PHMDC response seems to indicate there's somewhere around roughly 40 contact tracers currently for Dane County, much lower than all the recommendations. Moreover, with reopening, you would expect the number of needed contact tracers to go up, given an increase in the number of cases and an increase in the number of contacts per case. And as other localities are indeed reporting an increase in the number of contacts that need to be traced with reopening. But the PHMDC response appears to assume that everything is static, that the current number of contact tracers will be perfectly sufficient. So even in just that one response, there appears to be serious problems, and that how things are set up now cannot achieve control. If control is not possible, it's hard to see how reopening can be justified or considered safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. I just want to go back to the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes for both May 14th and May 19th? I see you. I'm just trying to get to you. Alder Abbas?
Yeah, I would like to move the motion to approve May 14th and May 19th meeting minutes.
And do I have a second? Oh. Alder Turney?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussions? If not, please raise your hand, or I'm so used to saying that. If there's no objections, I will record a unanimous vote. And I don't see any objections, so we will record a unanimous vote for that. Thank you. And then going on to number 4, do I have any disclosures or recusals? Okay, I don't see any hands up for disclosures and recusals. At this time, I would like to go to number 5, and that's 60615, extending the deadline for the report and recommendations from the President's Work Group to review Council communications tools and process for until September 30th. Alder Foster, did you want to talk on that? Are you here, Alder Foster? Okay, I do not see Alder Foster.
I'm right here. I was just waiting to be unmuted.
Okay, I'm going to have you, hold on, I'm looking for you.
And just to clarify, I think you said number 5, but I think you're on number 6. I don't know if you wanted to take this up right now or if you wanted to do item 5 first.
Yeah, Council President, there was an updated agenda. Number 5 is the presentation by Chief of Staff.
Okay, I do not have that one. Okay, so let's do number 6 since we've already started, and then I'll go back to number 5, and I will pull up the amended one. Grant, do you want to talk to that while I pull that up?
Sure can. Yep. So this was
Thank you.
From our previous Common Council discussion. It was noted that the previous there was an amendment to this work group that extended the deadline to March, and due to the work that needs to be done there, as well as our inability to meet the last several months, it's recommended that we extend the deadline to September 30th. We're currently scheduled for our next meeting a week from Thursday, and we'll be able to regroup and review the timeline that we have in front of us and come up with a work plan to get the work done by September 30th.
Great. Thank you, Alder Foster. Do I have, does anyone have any questions regarding this? If not, do I have a motion? Please raise your hand. Alder Kimball.
Approval.
And it's been moved. Do I have a second? Alder Abbas.
I will second it.
Thank you. It's been moved and second. Is there any other discussions? Are there any objections to me recording this as a unanimous vote? Then we will record that as a unanimous vote. And then I have pulled up the amended agenda. So we will go to number 5, 60769, and that is a briefing from Chief Wall. And Chief Wall, I see you, but I'm looking for you. I found you, Chief Wall.
There we go. It looks like he's unmuted.
Good now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I'll provide sort of a summary timeline of the last few days.
Actually, Chief Wall, if you don't mind, just for the record, I just wanted to let CCEC know that we do have one registrant who's not wanting to speak. Tiffany Kenny, who either supports or opposed, but was registered, but did not want to speak, and is a member of Madison Central Bid,
Okay.
but is available to answer questions.
Thank you, Kwesi.
Okay, so I'll start on Saturday midday. Obviously, there was a large demonstration up on the Capitol Square. I think we had received word about it the prior day, so we had about 24 hours to do some planning and put a staffing plan in place. It was a good-sized group. After they were on the square, they did some marching downtown, went around the public safety building, eventually went down East Washington Avenue, and it was actually like around a good 4 hours of combined demonstration and marching. And we've done a lot of very similar protests over the years, and our folks sort of trailed along to block traffic and facilitate movement of the group. And it was it was relatively unexceptional as it continued. About 4:30, the larger event ended up on the square. The crowd started to disperse, and we started to have our folks leave the square and come back here to the city county building to basically finish the day. Is what the plan was. A smaller group, around 150 or so, sort of broke off from the larger group, and initially started actually following our officers back from the square as they were trying to come to the city county building and finish their shift. So they were pretty aggressive, but our officers just disengaged, got into the city county building, and then at that point we sort of monitored the group a little bit from the city cameras, and someone had parked an unmarked MPD squad car right on the Doty Street side of the city county building near the door the officers used. And pretty quickly the group started to focus on that and started jumping on it, trying to flip it over and throwing things at it, shattering the windshield, denting it, breaking the glass. And then after a while of doing that, the group started moving sort of towards the State Street area. As they did so, they engaged in some additional property damage, damaged a sidewalk cafe at a restaurant, and then sort of stopped in the intersection of State and Dayton, where they blocked traffic for a while, started jumping on a Madison Metro bus, and sort of remained static there for a bit. We noticed that there was a group in that group. There was a smaller group of individuals carrying long sticks that were not attached to signs or part of signs. They were long. I'm not sure what the origin was, but long sticks. And that smaller group was even more aggressive than the rest. They moved out of the intersection, started moving down the streets. There was a few small physical altercations, though it's not clear from the video whether that was within the group or with bystanders. And then they sort of paused in the 200 block of State Street there for a while, and then focused their attention on a jewelry store and started breaking the windows and trying to make entry into the store. And so up until this point, we had not engaged. There were no officers present. And it was only after we saw the looting of the jewelry store start that we recognized we needed to act and deploy our officers. So our officers deployed into the 200 block of State Street, wearing protective gear, gave an order to disperse, which was not followed. And then chemical agents were used. And at that point, we began trying to move the crowd out of the area. Now, based on our history with these types of events, obviously we have some contingencies, but we don't staff them, assuming they're going to deteriorate into a significant, a disturbance and unrest. So it took some time to get additional staffing in and officers in order to get control of the crowd and of the area. We did an all call for all MP personnel to come in. We utilized the the emergency police system, which basically puts in a request for police officers from other jurisdictions across the state of Wisconsin. And of course, we're asking for assistance from our partners here within Dane County. And so over the course of the night, as more officers trickled in, we were able to put more people in protective gear and continue moving the crowd and trying to gain control of State Street, at least, which is where the behavior we were observing was focused. Over the course of that night, the first night, there was about 75 businesses on State Street that were damaged or looted. We had a number of squad cars damaged, and of course, the one that I'm sure everybody saw was a car that a marked squad near State and Gorham, where actually officers, sort of in the midst of this, had responded to a person down call, and so we're responding to provide assistance to a report of someone who was down. And then after they got out of the car, the crowd sort of intervened and separated from the car, so that's why they weren't able to get back to the vehicle and why it was in that position. The crowd surrounded the car, damaged it extensively. As you saw, drove it down the street a short distance, started on fire, and ultimately was completely destroyed. One of our rifles was taken from the car before the fire was set, but we have been able to recover that, I'm happy to say. We did have our armored rescue vehicle, which was pulled into the area, and as we were moving it from one location to another, it was struck by gunfire. We also noted that there was some significant looting going on elsewhere in the city. Both Easttown and Westtown malls were looted pretty extensively, and there were a number of small fires set in the area. Clearly it was impossible for us to have the resources immediately to respond either on State Street or in the downtown area, or to the sort of citywide looting and disturbances and problems that we saw on a citywide basis. So that we made only a few arrests that night, I think 3. There's a number of reasons for the small number of arrests that I could go into later if people like, but it was a late night, I think, probably 4:30 or 5 a.m. before the bulk of our people were fully done. So on Sunday, we put in place a more robust staffing plan because of what we've seen here and what other cities across the country have been seeing in terms of some of this violence and damage and unrest. We put in a request for National Guard assistance, which is something that we've never done in my experience here. And so obviously it's not a simple endeavor, and so there was a lot of logistical and mechanical sort of details to making that work. And that took quite a bit of staff time and effort on Sunday to facilitate. But we also activated the emergency police system again on Sunday to bring in officers from elsewhere in the county and throughout the state. For most of the night, a relatively small crowd gathered at the top of State Street, and we're just marching around the square, marching up and down State Street. We had a small number of officers out on the street in standard uniform. The bulk of our people were all staged away from the area, not visible. All the National Guard people were staged away from the area. No one was visible. And so we were just watching the crowd and not engaging, not initiating any contact with them. And then the 9:30 curfew hit. We made the conscious decision we weren't going to engage the crowd. They were not causing any problems. There had been a few incidents of rock throwing during the day or during the earlier hours, but we did not engage up until that point. And then so the group started moving again around the square, and there was a handful of officers that were, again, just staged in standard uniform. And for whatever reason, the crowd sort of rapidly moved towards the officers, surrounded them, and the officers started getting hit with projectiles. And then at least one person from the group started trying to get at the officers and then actually struck one of the officers. And so the crowd was a pretty good size at that point, and so that precipitated the need for additional officers to respond and clear the crowd because of the threat to the officers and the need to extricate them from that position. And then, of course, we saw sort of a similar pattern, although with some differences Sunday night, where we had Saturday night. There were multiple stores looted in the State Street area. A lot of fires were set, quite a few more fires on Sunday and Monday than there were Saturday. Dumpster fires, the crowds were pulling dumpsters, rolling them in the streets, rolling them near parked cars, starting them on fire. Of course, a lot of graffiti and property damage, and both Saturday and Sunday, and certainly continuing last night, a countless number of rocks, bottles, chairs, other projectiles being thrown at officers. And while we saw some officer injuries over the course of the last 3 nights, clearly we had dozens of officers struck by projectiles, but for the protective gear, we'd have a number of very serious injuries on the part of our officers because of that. We were able to make a few more arrests on Sunday into Monday, 15. 2 of the individuals who were arrested were armed with handguns, and there were a few people that seemed to make a concerted effort to steal an MPD squad, and that was not successful, and those folks were arrested as well. And then there was a similar timeline Sunday into Monday in terms of when the crowd finally cleared and we were able to send our people home. So then that takes us to yesterday, and the day started outside the city county building here with a protest on Carroll Street. Crowd. There was the group was out front here for a while, then they marched down to John Nolan Drive, as you all probably saw. Our folks were very hands-off. We just had vehicles in the area to block traffic and sort of facilitate their movement. And once it was clear they were going to sort of park themselves at John Nolan and North Shore there, we set up a traffic plan with traffic engineering to do some detours and make sure that they were able to do that safely and that the traffic was still able to move through the area as needed. And so that was uneventful. They were there for 3-4 hours, I want to say. They marched back up here to Carroll Street, and then after a short sort of continuation here, that group broke up and left the area. And so what we saw was a fair number of those people migrated towards the top of State Street, and clearly we saw a much larger crowd at the top of State Street last night than we had the previous night. And so we tried a slightly different approach last night, and did not even have officers out in standard uniform visible. We wanted to avoid potential for those folks in the crowd intent on causing problems to fixate on an officer or try to surround an officer or anything like that. So there were no officers out there. And for most of the night, the things were going smoothly. The group was doing its thing. It was very clear in the event that there is a number of individuals sort of interspersed in the crowd that were clearly intent on causing damage and trying to provoke a police response. We saw a lot of graffiti, some minor property damage, but nothing to the level that required us to respond. And actually, some of those folks were calling in things to 911, saying there were fights and saying that there was property damage going on to try to provoke a police response. We did observe people in the periphery of the crowd with Molotov cocktails. They attempted to light and attempted to throw into the Veterans Museum there on the square. we did not deploy visibly, and we're hopeful that the crowd would do its thing, finish its demonstration, finish its protest, and then just go home, and that would be the end of it. About 1 o'clock a.m., the larger protest did come to an end, disperse, and almost immediately, a part of the group, a couple hundred maybe, started running down State Street and immediately started breaking into businesses, breaking windows, looting. And so at that point, we deployed officers again in protective gear to secure State Street. And we saw a similar pattern as we did that. Officers were repeatedly struck with bottles, rocks, that sort of thing. And it took a number of hours, maybe not hours. It took a while just because State Street is so long with so many side streets and access points for us to sort of secure it. And we continued to respond to reports of looting and damage in the area, and attempted to respond to those individually and make arrests when we were able to. We also saw citywide looting last night, though not to the extent that there was on Saturday night. We saw, this was on Sunday, groups of cars traveling with their license plates obscured, going from business to business, not just in Madison, but in some of our surrounding communities, and looting businesses and stores, the Target here in Madison, and I know Sun Prairie had an incident with the group as well, looting. We've seen very clear indication that these smaller subsets of the groups are planning, coordinating their efforts to loot or to cause property damage or to inflict injury or to provoke a response. I've seen a lot of evidence of that, and so it's clear that some of those folks are taking advantage of what we're seeing, taking advantage of the moment in protests in order to try to have a little cloak of anonymity so they can sort of engage in some of this behavior. Also last night there were a number of shots fired, reported and heard by officers down in the area. Not clear what they were directed at, but no one was in custody for that. We did make, I think, 13 arrests last night is the total number. And again, the timeline was similar, about 4 a.m. Send our main force of officers home. And then, although, of course, as you probably saw at I think 5 a.m., one of our local reporters was doing a live shot on the morning show and was assaulted down there. Crew and her were assaulted. And we were fortunately able to make an arrest in that case. So we've been we're back at it really this morning in terms of both planning and response. There's been, again, as you probably saw today, a group of vehicles that started around the public safety building and was doing a variety of things on the belt line and in the area. And so we've been monitoring that and blocking traffic and facilitating traffic flow as needed. We've been working with our other partners at the state and county level, and we'll continue to have a robust staffing plan available tonight. We'll certainly take a look at the last 3 nights and lessons learned and ways that we can improve and fine tune our approach. I think, certainly up until 1 o'clock, the approach last night worked fairly well, but clearly it was not the desired outcome and not acceptable, I think, for any of us to have that level of property damage and violence downtown after that. So we're still fine-tuning what the response will be tonight. We'll continue to have the emergency police service assistance and the National Guard assistance. I'm hopeful through the weekend, and then we can, at least that's what we tried to secure them for. Obviously, none of us know how long we might see this kind of behavior continue, but we'll have to put plans in place as if it's going to be extended and make sure that we have the resources to deal with it as safely as we can. I think one of the challenges is that there's a number of challenges, certainly internally. Our special events team is a limited number of officers, and they've all worked, about 3 18-hour days in a row now with a very limited sleep, which is a challenge for them, both in terms of their, ability to continue working at that pace and then their family as well. We're finding that our requests for outside agencies are a challenge. Milwaukee, of course, had a lot of unrest and violence, as has Minneapolis, and both National Guard and some law enforcement from the northern part of the state are being called to those two areas as well to assist. So we're not the only ones that are asking for assistance and needing assistance. But we're working on sort of more of a long-term plan. I think one of the challenges was sort of the magnitude of resources and staffing needed for this, pretty massive, and it wasn't apparent until that it started on Saturday night. So I liken it to planning something that's more complex than Freak Fest, and not being able to plan it until the event's already started, and then having to plan another one for the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And so it's a remarkable challenge for our folks, and I think clearly, the damage, the violence, the unrest that we've seen is unlike anything I've seen in 29 years with MPD, and is really very unprecedented. So I'm hopeful, that we'll have calm tonight. I'm hopeful that there will be no need for any intervention, and that we'll be able to not have any of the looting, the property damage, or the violence, and that's certainly our objective as we go into these events. Some of that is obviously out of our control, and we'll continue to do the best we can, and fine-tune our approach every evening, trying to learn from the previous evenings and to make sure that our strategy and our tactics are as good as they can be. I think that's about all I have for an overview. If people have questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Does anyone have any questions? Raise your hand so I can find you. Alder Kimball.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, hi, thanks, Chief. I have 2 questions. One, did you get our email yesterday with a list of pretty specific questions we asked of you?
Oh, Lord.
Yes, I got the email and the letter. I have not had a chance to really digest it or work on a response yet. So yes, I did receive it, but I don't have specific answers for you.
Okay. And then secondly, I was just curious about your recounting of the events on Saturday, and at the press conference, you recounted it just about the same way. When those people followed your officers back to the city county building and were jumping up and down all over and destroying a squad car, why didn't you respond to that? Why didn't your officers respond to that?
Well, I think there's a couple, factors that go into those decisions. I mean, at that point, you've got a number of people there that are clearly no longer engaged in nonviolent protests. Clearly, things have transitioned to property damage and problems. And the issue is that when we're going to intervene with a group that is violent like that and demonstrating that sort of behavior, we're going to do that with our protective gear on. So we're not going to go out to a group that's doing that, without protection. But unfortunately, it takes time to put that stuff on. So pretty quickly, when that behavior was observed, we had some of our officers, our contingents, begin preparing to intervene and preparing to get into their protective gear. But that takes time to move them from one point to another, and then the gear takes time to move on. And then ultimately, of course, the group moved to State Street, and then once we have to move down there, it just physically takes time to get there. So that's one of the challenges in all of these scenarios is, ideally, we'd like to be out there wearing this and sort of showing a standard policing uniform face, but when we're dealing with dangerous encounters, you have to have protective gear on, and it's just a slow process to get that stuff on. And for that type of event, we don't have the staffing where we're going to have a staged team that's dressed in the protective gear.
Okay. So when you saw that happening, you immediately started preparing to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can't remember if it was immediately, but certainly very quickly we recognized that was a problem with that group and that we were going to need to prepare for it. You know, I can't tell you how long it took to connect those dots and get those wheels in motion.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Alder Kimball, Alder Badar.
Thank you, President Carter. Chief, I just want to have a broader conversation with you if you can explain the issue of curfews and the effectiveness of and the reason why you feel curfews are an effective way for you to manage this situation.
Sure, I think there's a couple aspects to it. I think first and foremost, I think it's important for the city to, recognize how significant unrest, how significant this behavior has been, and how critical it is that we have an effective response to it. And I think the curfew declaration to try to keep people out of the downtown area is one component of that. I also think that once we have found it to be an important tool during the evening after things have gone to a problematic level where there's property damage and things like that, to engage and apprehend people that are refusing to leave or that have been engaged in problematic behavior earlier, but maybe we have not been able because of sort of the confusion and chaos and complexity of the situation, connect the dots necessarily with the behavior they've engaged in. Certainly, as we've looked at what other cities across the country have been doing, and imposing a curfew has been very consistent. And I think most cities that are having this sort of unrest have imposed curfews. Certainly, some have taken different. I'd say probably most have taken a much more assertive or aggressive approach in enforcement. I think most of the cities' curfews have been citywide, and I think they've been much more, I would say, proactive about anybody who's up and about after the curfew, they're going to try to arrest. I think we've tried to be a little more circumspect about that. And clearly, the last two nights, the folks that were out there, clearly part of the protest, clearly, not engaging in any violence or destructive behavior, we're not going to decide that that's an opportunity to enforce the curfew. Just like we're not going to go out and enforce people for blocking the road if it's consistent with public safety and part of their First Amendment, expressive activity. But I think clearly it's important, that the other point I would throw out is that Saturday, one of the problems we saw was that it's much more difficult to just try to focus on problem people if there's more people in the area. I mean, the biggest challenge is trying to identify a subset that is bound and determined to loot, throw rocks, throw bottles, cause injury when they're interspersed in a larger group of people that aren't interested in doing it. And if there's a curfew, you don't have as many people to cause that confusion. Saturday, it was much more difficult for us to gain control because you just had a lot more hangers-on, passers-by, people who were spectating, and it's much more difficult then to know who's doing what and who's got what reason for being down there. And so I think having less potential for the crowd to grow, less potential for spectators, less potential for others to decide they want to join in, that's another benefit of the curfew.
Thank you. I know we have very little time and probably a lot of others with questions. I guess one last question, I'll just stick to the curfew question, is that something that we have done in other instances where there is large crowds like Freak Fest? Is curfew something that you've done in those kind of circumstances?
No, I don't. I'm not aware of a prior emergency order in Madison that's had a curfew. I think the distinction is that Freak Fest is a once a year activity, and certainly if we had a good reason to think that, I guess when we had problems there, it wasn't Freak Fest, it was just Halloween. If we thought that was going to happen tomorrow, we might very well decide a curfew was a good answer. And clearly here we have obviously 3 nights in a row of very significant civil unrest and property damage. And I think so that's a little bit of a distinction with Halloween, when Halloween was very focused on, it's a one-time event or a once a year event.
Okay, thank you, Alder Berdar. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And I'll move away from the curfew because I had some questions related to that, but because time of an essence. I know that Alder Kemble asked the chief about the reference the letter that with specific questions that were referred. Could you tell me where or when the Public Safety Review Committee was going to be stood up? Because that was part of my query, because those questions were the questions that definitely sit within that Public Safety Review Committee. So, and my question to you is, when will that Public Safety Review Committee be stood up?
Who's that question to?
That to Kwesi or?
Alder McKinney, is that to Chief Wall?
Well, Chief Wall does not, but he knows when that committee's going to.
I'm just trying to figure out who you were asking that question to.
Well, the content of the letter from the alders and Alder Kemble had some questions that definitely would fit right within the Public Safety Review Committee. And that was one of the requests that I had made, is number one, that the Public Safety Review Committee would be stood up. And I think that Kwesi's response to me, and please, Kwesi, maybe you can add something to that committee would be stood up. And my question is, when will it be stood up? Is there any movement in that direction at all? Do we have any finality in that?
Yeah. I believe the mayor also wants to speak to it, but my understanding is that it should be happening definitely this month. I'm not sure the exact day because the committee is also supposed to be recommending its members for the body cam committee. But I will, if the mayor can be unmuted to kind of.
I'm unmuted. Thank you, Kwesi, and thank you, Alder, for the question. I believe that President Carter and I have approved this committee and many others to stand up as soon as their staff members are trained and have confirmed that the committee members have the correct devices and connectivity. So I think at this point, it's only a question of scheduling and making sure that those trainings are happening. And I'm sorry that I don't have the most recent calendar of meetings in front of me, but that's the only hold up at this point. I think we've approved both PSRC and a number of other committees to start meeting on a regular basis.
And so as a follow-up, I want to lift that up in terms of a sense of urgency, because some of the questions that were brought up in the letter that Alder Kemble helped to generate, those are questions that are before us now, and there's a sense of urgency in those questions that need answers to those. And so it's not when that committee, Public Safety Review Committee, would be stood up, but when we're looking at a sense of urgency and looking at answers, and the chief reports directly to that body.
Alder Harrington McKinney, I just received word that PSRC is trained and they have a meeting scheduled for the 10th.
That's what I needed. Thank you so very much. And so with that, Chief Wall, would you be able to prepare the letter that was sent to you via the other alders? Would you be in a position to be ready to report that on the 10th?
Oh, I thought you were, Chief Wall, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, he needs to be unmuted. I think he's unmuted.
I'm good now. It wasn't allowing me to unmute. The short answer is I don't know, Alder. I mean, if this continues, what we've seen the last 3 nights continues, I think, unfortunately not. I'd be happy. I want to be as responsive as I can, but I think, like most of our command staff have been working 18-hour days with not time for anything really. And so just focusing entirely on the urgent day-to-day response of making sure that we're staffed and have things in place. So if I'm able to, I certainly will, but I just don't want to give you an assurance that might not come to be, because it depends on what we see here in the city the next few days.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions, Alder?
No, I don't think I'll get to an answer, but no.
Okay, thank you. I will go with next is Alder Tierney. I will unmute you now. Where are you? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions for Chief. Well, one,
okay.
He kind of alluded to it a moment ago, but I was going to ask him what the overall morale of the officers of the department is, and how they're functioning through this. But the other question I had was, it seems to me that there is a group of people that, from what I'm seeing, I don't think they're associated with the protesters. There seems to be an organized group that's seeking to take advantage of this situation for purposes of conducting criminal activity. And I'm wondering what we've been able to learn about the people that really seem to be instigating the property damage and the looting. Are they from the Madison area? Do they have past criminal histories? What do we know about these individuals that really seem to be trying to pour gasoline on the situation?
Sure. So for the first question, I guess, it's a complicated response. I think people are certainly exhausted and, very stressed out. And it's, not only are they working 18-hour days, they're wearing heavy gear, they're standing on their feet, getting hit with rocks and having, a lot of unkind things said to them. And I think, probably one of the most frustrating aspects for us is that, when we saw the thing in Minneapolis, I think there's tremendous common ground between MPD officers, from me all the way down to the rank and file, and the folks out protesting. I think you probably all saw the statement I put out on it, the statement the Dane County Chiefs put out on it, and I can tell you that from what I hear and hear internally from our rank and file people, they all feel the same way. There's common ground, and so I think for us to have such sort of commonality in viewing that incident, and then sort of such a divergent outcome here, it is hard for people to take. And I think, our officers have a lot of stake in the community, and it's hard for them to see this, level of damage and this just sort of, chaos. So I think it's hard, and that's why I'm hopeful to have some respite and have a calm night. To your second question, we don't have a complete picture of that yet. I can tell you that most of the arrests we've made have been local people, have been Madison people, including the ones that have been involved in, significant property damage and looting. And certainly what we've heard from some of other cities across the country where we've seen this sort of problem is there has been people from outside the community coming in to engage in that behavior. And so the people that we've arrested so far that generally hasn't been the case, but certainly, unfortunately, there's quite a few that we haven't arrested, obviously. And my hope is that we'll be able to really make a concerted effort to do follow-up and see if we can connect dots and do follow-up cases and identify these people down the road when we're able to, and then maybe possibly, I'm not certain that what we have is a representative sample at this point, but most have been local so far. And I just don't have any more insight right now about or any of those details.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Art Attorney. Then Alder Foster.
Thanks. And thank you, Chief Wall. I know this is an incredibly stressful time for everybody in the department. So thank you all for putting in the long hours. My question is around, you mentioned that sort of following what seemed to be the primary protest on Saturday, there was a smaller group, about 150, that kind of continued on, and then you described the kind of attack on the squad car on Doty Street. When that occurred, and it sounds like you all were perhaps kind of watching that happen from inside CCB, what would you estimate in terms of how many individuals were involved in that activity? Was it the entire group of 150 that were sort of damaging the vehicle, or what did that look like?
Good question. I mean, certainly now 150 are going to fit around the squad, even so. A dozen to 2 dozen, give and take. I mean, so certainly that at one point they tried to lock the thing over, so that's when there was a lot of people there, but people were sort of taking turns throwing stuff at it and kicking it and smashing it and stuff. So that's my best recollection right now.
So then you said that, I think to Alder Kemble's question, you said that the reason that you didn't, the immediate response at that moment is that officers were not in protective gear. And so that was sort of the key to begin putting that gear on in order to respond. My questions are around sort of that decision to use protective gear and some of the tactics that go along with that. Where can you help us understand sort of where that line is? I mean, I know you guys, work a lot of sort of crowded events, football games, et cetera. Obviously, you're typically doing that without any riot gear. What sort of tips the scales to where you say we can't safely or appropriately sort of manage what's going on here, that we need to kind of switch gears?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there isn't a magical formula or a particular on-off switch, and certainly, our preference is to be able to, police these events just in standard uniform, and you heard me talk a little bit about history with protests in general. We've done these things hundreds of times over the years. Even a lot of protests focus on police and have been able to, engage and have things go well, and that's always our goal. But I think when I guess there's a couple things. So certainly, if you have indication of violence or potential for violence, if you have an issue where there's clearly additional focus on officers, where it gives us an indication or an impression that there might be hostility towards officers, where there might be a physical attack. That's when we want to think about the protective gear. I mean, the challenge is that it's it's like turning a cruise ship kind of. It takes a long time to put on, and it takes a long time to put off. And so if you go out to engage a crowd that's in a sort of a borderline state, and you don't have the protective gear on, and then they start throwing rocks at you, then you have no choice really but to disengage and go put the gear on. And that takes a long time. And there's a lot of bad consequences to disengaging like that sometimes, depending on the circumstances. Certainly our preference is always, to be able to handle these things with no, conflict, with no sort of level of engagement that requires that. And I'm trying to remember the last time we would have worn protective gear. I want to say it's, goes back to the pre-Freak Fest Halloween riots. I can't say for sure that there hasn't been something in between, but so it's a pretty uncommon thing for us, and it's a pretty, it's a pretty high burden where we're going to do that. But there just isn't a clear answer.
Thanks. And my last question: what do you think the impact is on once that sort of shift happens? As you said, it's sort of hard. It takes some time to go from plainclothes or uniform to protective gear. What do you know about, or what do you think about what impact it has on a group of protesters when that change happens as well? And I guess, what have you seen just in these last nights, or what is sort of known more broadly about the impact that has on how a crowd reacts?
Well, it's a real conundrum. I mean, there's no doubt that generally, if there's a crowd and they see the cops come out in protective gear, that sends a message. I mean, clearly the cops aren't going to be walking through the crowd engaging, chit-chatting in protective gear, because something's gone on where you've moved to a different level now. And certainly, no doubt, particularly in this current context, those small group of people that are really just down there for the conflict, for that purpose, and that's some of them, then for them, that's the notice that, hey, all right, it's time now to start throwing stuff or to start doing whatever we're going to do. The challenge is if you try to avoid that and go out in soft clothes or standard uniform, you're putting your officers at great risk, and it's a hard balance to strike, and it's something that we, in these command posts, is a real struggle in terms of there's not an objective truth or a right or wrong answer, and you're bound to have criticism for either doing it too soon or doing it too late. And I recognize there's no right or wrong answer necessarily. And although certainly, Sunday night, the behavior started without the crowd control gear, without the protective gear, so that wasn't a trigger that night. But you make a good point. It clearly is very obvious to everybody that, hey, this is something's different now. And that's what we struggle with in the command post for making those decisions.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Verveer.
Thank you, President Carter. Thank you, Chief, for being with us this afternoon. Before I ask a question or two, I just want to thank the first responders so much for all the hard work that they put in the last 3 days trying to combat the mayhem that we've experienced downtown, especially our own Madison cops and firefighters and paramedics. And I don't know if my colleagues are aware, but we literally have had first responders assist us downtown from all over the state. I've met officers from all over the state the last couple of days. Talked, for example, a trooper that came all the way from Superior the other night, and I could go on and on. Literally all corners of the state we've had help from, and I can't thank them enough on behalf of the community and especially downtown stakeholders. So, as you can all imagine, and especially you, Chief, I can't tell you how angered and saddened I am by the vandalism. and looting and bodily injury that's occurred the last couple of days, 3 days. And I've been overwhelmed with residents and merchants and property owners asking me a million questions of all varieties. I don't blame them one bit. So to get to a question or two for you, Chief, and you mentioned in your initial testimony that, of course, you and your colleagues are trying to learn lessons from what's happened the last 3 days. And so I really want to just narrow my question down to the lessons learned part of the main question I've been asked by so many Capitol Square and State Street residents and merchants and property owners. And by the way, for those that don't realize, there are people living above almost all of these buildings that have been attacked the last few days. People that are living there, that are trying to sleep there, that are trying to be safe in their homes. I realize that that message hasn't gotten across, that it's mostly thought that it's commercial establishments that have been attacked. But I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that are scared out of their wits' ends about their home being set on fire by an arson during all of this. So the main question I've been asked over and over, Chief, is, isn't there a way that you could allow for some law enforcement to be stationed in the State Street area while you're perhaps, dealing with issues on the Capitol Square? Why couldn't there be tonight officers stationed on every block of State Street that has been so attacked? You don't know, it looks like a war zone over there. My response has been officer safety, and that officer safety always comes first. And you've already had a lot of discussion about hard gear versus soft gear worn by the officers. But could you just explain, so I, in part, frankly, know how to respond to my constituents, why we haven't been able to have officers stationed on every block on State Street to try to be preventative and proactive in trying to keep the vandalism and looting at bay?
Well, I think it's a great question, Mike, and I've received a lot of the probably emails from probably the same folks you have asking similar questions, expressing similar opinions. And I can, I'll start by telling you that, I'm personally, not satisfied with how things turned out last night. And while these are remarkably challenging things to police, and you're balancing all sorts of competing interests and really trying to thread a needle in terms of what the right response is, and you'll only know if you got it right after the fact. But I recognize that to have looting 3 nights in a row on State Street in sort of the heart of our entertainment district is not okay. And so I certainly, my sort of marching orders first thing this morning were to our folks that, we have to, we fine-tune things every night, and we have to learn every night. And I expect there will be a different, a different response tonight. I think we're trying to find a balance where we don't put cops in a position where they're going to be an opportunity for a flashpoint or to be assaulted or to, have it be about us. But we also have to recognize that, unfortunately, when you want to move 200 cops wearing heavy protective gear, it doesn't go quick. It takes a long time. And so we are working on contingencies and fine-tuning the plan to try to thread that needle and find that balance where we're able to get what you're looking for. I will say that it's a big area though, and even on the last 2 nights, once we've secured State Street from top to bottom, we've continued then to see issues going on elsewhere downtown in the periphery, and so it's such a large pool of opportunity, and that's not even getting to sort of the things elsewhere in the city. So it's very difficult. We have sort of upped our request for outside resources. I'm not sure if we'll have those tonight yet, but I hear what you're saying, and we're trying to fine tune things and keep improving every night.
Thank you, and I appreciate that this has been overwhelming, and it's so tough for you and the SEC commanders and so forth to figure out what the right balance is and what the correct strategy is. It was quite clear for those of us that have been paying close attention that the strategy shifted over the last couple of nights seemingly, and that seemed for so long to be the correct move and seemed to work out well in the first hours last night. But again, I don't mean to be overly repetitive here. I'm not saying this as much because of the horrific, there's not a lot of more vandalism that can be done. There's not any glass that's left. It's awful to say that. It's not even about the looting, but it's been overwhelming to see last night boards being ripped off by these folks. I should call them what it is, criminals. These criminals engaging in burglary, ripping off the boards of these stores that have been boarded up to steal merchandise that's left. Most of these stores have been cleared out. But my main concern, I just can't overstate this enough, is when I hear people tell me firsthand that they see people trying to start fires, they see Molotov cocktails that have been thrown into stores where the people are attempting arson. Thank God we haven't had the fires of other cities have experienced, but I've just had so many people, Chief, so dozens and dozens of people down there that live down there, that work down there, that say, why can't we try having officers on every block just watching things? I know I'm asking a lot for them, for the SEC team to be in soft gear, because we know hard gear is a flashpoint, and that's quite understandable. Anyway, you understand my point. It's not me to micromanage the department. You're the experts, not I, but the devastation is just overwhelming. The agony is overwhelming. We're all so heartbroken. I'm so worried that State Street will never, ever recover from this. This is nothing like what we ever saw at a Mifflin Street block party or Halloween's riots before Freak Fest. I've been there for all of that, just as you have been. And this is just uncomparable. I'm numb. Anything you can do to try to protect the greater State Street area. And again, I get the point that these are only businesses, but these are lives, not only the livelihoods of these small business people, but again, there are people living in almost all of these buildings. These are residences, and they're being attacked. They've been attacked for the last 3 days. We saw what happened in the Mansion Hill and Langdon neighborhoods on Sunday night when the rioters were pushed that way and the fires started. I can only imagine what a tragedy we would have had if those fires were outside of the dumpsters and the streets. So I won't belabor the point. I thank you, Chief. I thank you, President Carter, and my colleagues for letting me get some of this off my chest. I just had, and I appreciate good questions that have been asked and answered before I was called upon. I just had to, Chief, again, ask that one question that's been asking me over and over and over. We haven't tried having law enforcement on every block at the beginning of the evening, just standing watch. And could we please try that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Auto Revere. And we have 1 minute to go before IT has to set up for our next meeting. So I would like to propose a couple things. I would like to propose that we have Janelle, item 60703, have that at our next meeting, our next CCE meeting. And then also, if there are no objections to that, and then the other thing I just wanted to mention the dates that I have already secured for our additional CCEC meetings. I might be able to add more, but these are the dates that I have secured, and that is July 25th, June 25th, July 9th, and July 30th, all starting at 6:30. And I will continue to work on more dates, but I wanted to get that to you tonight. And of course, we'll send out a meeting appointment. So you don't have to do that, but I wanted to get that on your radar tonight.
Council
Alder-
President, if you don't mind, I just wanted to put on the record real quick that for item 7, we did have Ian Graves who opposed but did not choose to speak, and we had 3 registrants for item 8. Tom Oliver, who was in support and wanted to speak, Patrick Remington, who neither supported nor opposed but wanted to speak, and Christine Uganda, who was in support but did not want to speak. Just wanted to put that on the record.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I will ask all of those people. First of all, thank you for bearing with us, but we did run out of time. And I would really like for you to possibly come, if it fits your schedule, to come to our next CCE meeting, because we'll have it on that. And I want to also touch base with Alder Kimball. She has her hand up, and then we're unfortunately going to have to adjourn the meeting. But Alder Kimball. Oh.
This meeting was supposed to be all about speaking with the public health director. I'm really disappointed we didn't make time to do that. And so I'm requesting that we can try to find a time next week to have a special CCEC meeting to meet with her.
Okay.
Could you try to do that?
Okay.
I will work to coordinate and try to see if we can get the schedules together.
Thank you, Alder Kimball. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I have a motion. Can I get a second? Alder Harrington McKinney.
Second.
Thank you. I have moved and seconded. If no objections, can I record this as unanimous vote? Oh, Alder Skidmore, your hand was up. No? Okay.
I believe you wanted to second.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alder Skidmore. It's been moved and seconded. I will go ahead, since there's no objections, and record this as a unanimous vote. Alder McKinney, your hand is up.
No, Lauren, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank everyone for coming. And we just ran out of time, and I apologize for that. And I'll see you in a few.